Welcome to the 2013 lecture of the Iscol Family Program for Leadership Development and Public Service. My name's Alan Matthews. I'm the Dean of the College of Human Ecology, and we are really blessed to have both Ken and Jill Iscol, the founders of this program, here with us tonight. So before I get going, I want you to both stand so we can give you a round of applause for making this possible. I also want to thank the staff and students who have helped put this program together. This program was developed 12 years ago, and when you look at the 12 speakers that we have had over these years, it's incredible. These people have made amazing differences in the world, and for you to be able to witness these at their early development sometimes in their mid-development, is a great privilege. And I know I get very inspired each year. It's one of my favorite nights of the year, actually, is to meet people like Leila that I've met today. So just a few reflections on the College of Human Ecology. We, as one of our learning goals as a college, stress very much that not only do we want you to learn as students and become experts in your field, but that we really believe true learning comes from experiential learning, from taking your curriculum and applying it in the real world. And so when Jill and Ken established this program about public leadership in leadership development and public service, I could not think of a better fit with what they wanted to accomplish and what the college's mission is to put people into the nitty-gritty of the real world, have them apply their curriculum to make differences in people's lives. So it's just a perfect fit, and I'm so privileged to be dean while this program has been so successful. And successful it has been. The program not only funds this lecture, but since 2007, the program has supported over 85 Cornell students throughout the university, all colleges, in public service internships in communities truly around the world. This past summer alone, 28 Iscol interns had their own firsthand experiences in communities from North Brooklyn, a lot of them were in North Brooklyn, to Tanzania, from Ithaca to India, where they worked to understand and shape ongoing efforts to overcome what really is truly some of the greatest challenges we face in health, education, and what I would call socioeconomic justice. Now, this lecture each year tends to spurn and give off internship opportunities for the future. And we have a great example from last year. Last year's speakers were from a firm called Medic Mobile, and one student from last year, Valerie Roski, are you here, Valerie? Yeah, Valerie, great. So Valerie was at this lecture a year ago and managed to turn that into a summer internship where she worked with them. And I'm going to quote you. I have this from a report, so I hope this quote's correct. And here we go. It was not until my internship with Medic Mobile this summer that I was challenged to think critically every day about how we can leverage human capital and technology to transform the way we think about and actually address the world's problems. So when you think about this impact that this lecture might have on one of you, please think about this, take it in. This could be a life-changing event for you if it's the right fit for the right person. So really, it's a wonderful testament to the impact, Ken and Jill, that these speaker series have on our students. I'm really pleased to see so many of you here today. Regardless of your undergraduate major here at Cornell, truly leading, and I mean leading, in your future careers will take the kind of passion, determination, and vision shared by the leaders that have come and graced this podium through this speaker series. And I've met Leila, and I could tell you she is no exception to any of those adjectives I just used, and you are in for a treat. Jill and Ken's biography is in your program, so I won't repeat all the wonderful work they have done. They also not only support this lecture series, but have also a lecture series in sustainability that is also one of the feature events at Cornell each year. So again, it's really a thrill for me to have them here and for them to witness the impact their series has on you. This program, as I said, serves the entire university. So we have been delighted these past 7 years to have collaborated with Entrepreneurship at Cornell and this class, the Entrepreneurship Speaker Series, so that more students across the universities can benefit from the inspiring examples that come and present. And this year, I want to especially thank the groups that helped us work with our summer interns. So this is the Urban Semester Program that College of Human Ecology runs, the Public Service Center of the university, the Global Health Program run out of the Division of Nutritional Sciences. These are really great collaborations for us. They make this pretty much a seamless operation to get students placed in the ideal setting so that they can put into action their dreams. At this time, I want to now turn the podium over to John Eckenrode, our fearless leader of the Iscol program. John truly does an incredible job leading this program. It's a great privilege to work with him. He's a professor in human development, and he's director of the Bronfenbrenner Center for Translational Research. This is a new center created in human ecology, but really designed to take the research of faculty throughout the university and put it into practice, to take the bench-to-bedside model that's so common in medical school, in the medical school field, and really apply that to social sciences. So how we can take all the research we do and make a difference in people's lives. So John leads this and does a wonderful job with that. His own work focuses on early interventions for at-risk families, child maltreatment, and stress. From the beginning of the Iscol program, he has worked very closely with the Iscol family and a planning committee, and many of the planning committee folks are in the room here with us, to, again, bring great speakers to all of us. So thank you, John, for leading this effort and working so closely with the Iscol family.
Thanks, Alan, and I'll keep my remarks quite brief, I hope. So I'm very honored to introduce our speaker tonight, and just very pleased that, again, we can do this in collaboration with the Entrepreneurship Program. So I want to thank Pedro for allowing us this one session in his very interesting class. I want to also publicly thank, I couldn't do what I do without my amazing assistant, Patty Thayer. Where's Patty? She's somewhere in the room. And the events coordinator from the college, Diana Brinkman, who also helps with all the logistics for tonight. So those are the people who do all the work behind the scenes that I get credit for, so thank you. But a special thanks go again to Ken and Jill for endowing the program. It's really through their vision that it's possible to introduce such wonderful speakers to you. Now, the inspiration for this evening's program came from a project initiated by Jill Iscol, who collaborated with co-author Peter Cookson, that resulted in a book titled Hearts on Fire. The book tells the story of 14 visionary leaders who each in their own way are innovators and entrepreneurs in the cause of making the world a more just and humane place for all people to live. Well, it's certainly a treat to have Jill with us tonight, and she's agreed to come up on stage after our speaker is completed her presentation and get us rolling with the question and answer period. And Jill also generously will be in the back in the lobby afterwards signing copies of her book. If you'd like a copy of the book, you can purchase one after the talk. And please, there'll be a reception afterwards. You can all feel free to stay after. There'll be some snacks, and you can interact more informally with our speaker and with others afterwards. So let me just say a few words about our speaker for this evening, Leila Janah. I could say a lot more about her. I could spend the whole time talking about her accomplishments and the awards she's gotten, but I know you want to hear from her, and you can read her bio in your program, and I really encourage you to do that and to get on their website, the Samasource website, where there's all kinds of really interesting information. She's an extraordinary young woman, I've learned today, and I knew that before, but it only reinforced today when I saw her. Like a growing number of young social entrepreneurs are using their intelligence, their passion, their commitment to solve daunting problem of world poverty. Now, this is not by top-down distribution of resources to those in need, which is often called for when an acute tragedy strikes, but rather by building more sustained bottom-up approaches that enable poor to make a living on their own by being part of the global economy, and to do that while not dehumanizing or exploiting people or putting their health at risk. This is the story of Samasource. It's quite a story, and one I'm glad that we're able to bring to you tonight. I'll close my remarks with two short quotes from Mahatma Gandhi. The first is, quote, "Poverty is the worst form of violence." So poverty is the worst form of violence. The second quote is, "I cannot conceive of a greater loss than the loss of one's self-respect." Leila Janah, by founding and leading Samasource, has been able to bring self-respect to thousands of poor people around the world, and is now also doing so in the United States. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome me in joining Leila Janah to Cornell.
Well, thank you so much, John, for that generous introduction, and also to Alan and Jill and Ken and Patty and Jan and the entire team that brought me here. I'm really grateful, and I'm also happy to be back home in my roots. I was actually born outside of Buffalo before I defected to Southern California, so I'm happy to be here and thrilled that we have such good turnout tonight. I'm going to pretend that I don't know that some of you may be here for college credit. I know that you're all really excited about social entrepreneurship, and we're going to talk today about the Sama Group, which is a family of social enterprises that I founded, starting with Samasource, and now we also have Sama USA, our domestic program, and Sama Hope, which is a crowdfunding site. So I think they're going to pull up my slides. All right, here we go. So Sama means equal in Sanskrit. And it's also the root word for same in over 13 languages. And I chose this name as the founding concept for the Sama Group because I believe in creating enterprises that promote social justice. And when I first started the organizations, I had this vision of creating a family of enterprises that could be as entrepreneurial and as innovative as the Virgin Group is in the world of for-profit commerce, but applied to the field of social justice. I got my start when I was 17. This is a photograph of me in rural Ghana. I received a scholarship from, of all places, a tobacco company, the Lorillard Tobacco Company from Maryland. And I felt really guilty about using big tobacco money to go to college, and I also wanted to get the heck out of LA and have an adventure, so I convinced my guidance counselor in my junior year to let me spend my second semester of senior year abroad, to graduate early and go travel. And I found this amazing program run by the American Field Service that would let me spend 6 months volunteering in a school for blind young people in Ghana. So I packed up a few articles of clothing, threw it in a backpack, and shipped myself to Ghana in what would have been the second semester of my senior year in high school. And I had thought, like many of us when we go to developing countries, that I was going to show up in Africa and save the world. I was going to teach these poor, desperate children English, and then they were going to go on to do great things. And so I was shocked when I got there, when I got to this village called Akropong, where I lived, to find that my students, who had been born blind or partially sighted in one of the poorest countries in the world, spoke the Queen's English. They could name US senators. I had one student named Femi Abbas who told me that his favorite book was Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe, which I had read in high school and found pretty difficult to comprehend. I was just blown away by the magnitude of human talent that I saw in Ghana. And I was also blown away by the fact that so many of these young people were desperately poor despite their brilliance and really didn't have any future. I was shocked that a country that was so rich in human capital could be so poor. And I decided to try to learn more about it. And that eventually led me to found Samasource 5 years ago. So let's begin with the problem, which is jobs. So one of the things that I learned in Ghana was that we have a myth that we've internalized, and many of us do in the Western world, certainly I had. And the myth is that we live in a global meritocracy, where if you're smart and you're willing to work hard, you'll make it, and you'll live a great life, and you'll be able to provide for your family. My parents were immigrants in the US. They came here with nothing but an education, and they managed to get their 2 kids through good schools and colleges, and so I figured, why isn't that true for everybody else? It must be. And showing up in Ghana and seeing the kind of poverty that existed despite people's skill and will to work was really overwhelming. My father told me when we were growing up that life is really a birth lottery, and that by being born in America, we had drawn winning tickets, and so we had a duty to give back. And so the thing that surprised me most about my time in Ghana was that despite people's work ethic, they still remained poor. And when I started doing some digging later on in my college career, I found this shocking statistic, that 976 million people around the world work full-time and earn less than $2 a day for their efforts. These are the rickshaw pullers. These are the bread makers. These are the informal garment workers. These are the quarry workers in developing countries that have no legal protection, that are not really regarded as workers. And so they're stuck in this trap of poverty despite being willing to work really hard. A recent book came out by Jim Clifton, who's the chairman of the Gallup organization, the world's largest polling firm, which found that more than peace, love, an end to terrorism, or even food, what the whole world wants is a good job. And I found this to be true in my studies. I spent time studying international development at Harvard as an undergrad, and got really lucky. I was fortunate to spend a lot of time in the field. And I remember distinctly meeting a woman in Rwanda when I was there working on a project, a human rights project. We were looking at whether this system of justice that had been set up after the genocide met international legal norms. It was a fascinating question to a bunch of undergrads who were passionate about human rights. However, it was completely irrelevant for most Rwandans. I remember meeting a victim of the genocide who'd lost her child and also been injured, and I remember asking her, what do you think about this question of justice, and does this court system really hold up? And she looked at me and she said, honestly, that's pretty irrelevant. I just care about having a job. And so could you hire me as a cook or as a driver? Or maybe you have a job for me as a translator. And it struck me that so much of our effort in these great Ivy League institutions is directed at questions that we care about, but not necessarily things that affect poor people directly. And I became really passionate about this idea of job creation then. So Samasource is based on the premise that whether you care about human rights or peace and security, whether you care about infant mortality, sex trafficking, or food security, what is at the root of many of the challenges in these sectors is lack of access to decent work, right? A living wage can transform lives. Work, I believe, is at the core of human dignity, but it needs to be dignified work. People have to earn living wages and be treated fairly. Well, thankfully, if we start thinking about what the great forces for job creation can be in our lifetimes, thankfully we live in a really unique and exciting era. We live in the era of big data. There are more bits of information in the digital realm than there are stars in the known universe. It's truly staggering. And data scientists estimate that some of this information, if it were tagged and analyzed, could be made useful. Very little of it today is made useful to big corporations and institutions. So we live in this world of big data that we're still not really processing and using. Now, this presents some really interesting opportunities for job creation, because in the last century, to create massive numbers of jobs in poor places, you needed infrastructure, right? You needed roads, you needed good waterways, you needed power, scalable power, and you needed friendly customs officials who could get your product out. You needed to build physical factories that could employ thousands of people to create jobs en masse. Well, today, in this century, we don't need all of that infrastructure because we can tap the greatest human resource around the world, which is the brain power at the bottom of the pyramid. And we can do that with increasingly low-cost devices. So last year, the Indian Education Ministry launched a $35 Android tablet, right? Some of you may have heard of the Raspberry Pi, which is a really low-cost computer that costs just 25 bucks, and you can plug it into a TV monitor. And we're now seeing the rise of very low-cost internet infrastructure all over the world. Mark Zuckerberg, along with several partners, just launched internet.org, which many of you may have heard of, which is aimed to connect the world's poorest people to the internet, which views connectivity as one of the basic, actually it's replacing, they believe, the most basic rung of Maslow's hierarchy. So we live in an entirely new era where we don't need all of this physical infrastructure to create jobs. All of this came to a head for me when I was visiting Kenya several years ago. It was in 2006. And the country had just gone through, or was just about to go through, rather, serious violence around its presidential election. So some of you may have heard this on the news or seen pictures. We saw all of these young people taking to the streets and rioting. And I remember thinking, oh, these people are probably incensed about, the lack of democratic process in the election. And I showed up in Kenya and found out from a local entrepreneur that actually a lot of these young people were paid to riot. They were paid $1 a day by an opposition party to go out in the street and make trouble. And it's astounding to me that in Kenya, you can essentially rent a brain for $1 a day. Right? These were young people who were educated. They'd been to high school. Kenya has one of the highest rates of literacy in sub-Saharan Africa. 95% of people under 30 can read and write in English. And yet this is all they have to do for work. So it struck me that this combination of the era of big data and increased connectivity and cheaper devices could all be put together to create a new model for work, to create a new model to bring jobs to the world's poorest people and address some of the social inequities that I'd seen in Ghana. Around the same time, I read The World is Flat by Thomas Friedman. How many of you have heard of or read that book? Got a good number of you. So Friedman's premise is that the global internet superhighway will really reduce the barriers to economic justice and allow more and more people to participate in the economy doing work like digital work, like outsourcing. And he talked about the rise of the outsourcing industry in countries like India, where now over 2 million young people find jobs as data entry operators and call center operators. I was very fortunate right after college to get a job as a management consultant. And my very first assignment was to go to India and work at a big call center. Now, I was really conflicted about this because right around the time that this book came out, a lot of people were saying that outsourcing was terrible for America, it was destroying the American economy, and here I was going to participate in that industry. So I showed up in India with a heavy heart, not thinking that I would find much to entertain myself. And I showed up in this giant call center with about 10,000 people who were taking calls for British Airways. And lo and behold, I met a young man who came from Dharavi, which is South Asia's largest slum. It's also famous for being the site of Slumdog Millionaire, if any of you saw that film. It's a place where there are open sewers and cholera outbreaks and pretty tremendous poverty. And I was really taken aback by the fact that a guy from Dharavi could get in a rickshaw in the morning and show up in this really fancy call center to do work and take calls for British Airways customers, many, many miles away. And all of a sudden, this light bulb went off in my head, and the dots connected, and I thought, well, what if we could take this digital work, what if we could take this outsourcing model and flip it on its head? What if outsourcing, rather than creating billions of dollars for a few rich capitalists, could create a few dollars for billions of people at the bottom of the pyramid? What if we could take digital work and locate it in the slums and rural areas that I'd visited and felt passionately about improving? And Samasource was born from that concept a few years later. So in 2008, a year after I quit my consulting job and nearly went bankrupt, I launched Samasource to connect very low-income women and youth to work over the internet. So our model is pretty simple. We find work from Silicon Valley companies. We've worked with over 100 customers, including Google and LinkedIn and Walmart.com. We find these big technology contracts, and we put them through a system that we developed called the Sama Hub. It's patented technology that we built. And the Sama Hub breaks down these big projects into small units of work that we call micro work. And I'll tell you a few examples of that work in a minute. But essentially, it's task-based work. It's like a virtual assembly line, right? An assembly line for the modern era. And what's remarkable about micro work is that we can employ people who traditionally wouldn't have the sorts of skills even to work at a fancy call center. They don't have project management skills. Most of them are young people like the ones that you saw in that picture. The kinds of young people who finished high school but don't have any skills to advance beyond that. The tasks are really interesting. This is an example of a project that we did a few years back. And I don't know if you can see it, the images are a little bit blurry, but the project was to look at images of parking lots for this company that monitors big retail parking lots. So they monitor IKEA's parking lots, for example. And our workers had to simply tag whether there was a car or not in the images. So we were training the computer algorithms that this company has developed to start detecting this automatically. Really astounding, but also really simple, right? You can imagine that this could be done by somebody without very high literacy or really fancy skills. So we do this work in 4 categories. We look at data, online content, transcription, and machine learning. And the work is really fascinating when you see it done in person. I'll show you some images soon of one of our workers in Uganda who makes his living tagging celebrity images for Getty Images. So the next time you open Us Weekly or People magazine, and I know none of you read those magazines, but the next time you happen to see one in an airport, the images in those magazines could well be tagged by people in northern Uganda who are looking at this giant image archive and looking at these images one by one and describing which celebrity is in them. Pretty crazy when you think about it. So we now serve workers in 9 countries, in East Africa, South Asia, Haiti, and also in the US, and I'm really excited about our US work. I'll just show you a little image there. We started this program in March of this year, and our US program, Sama USA, connects really low-income community college students to a chance to earn supplemental income through online work. So we teach them how to do basic things like setting up WordPress pages. There's a number of new tools for people to build really simple websites. And we teach them to go out in the community and find clients to do this sort of work. This is a booming industry, the industry of online work. It reached $1 billion last year. And we see this gaping hole in workforce development in this country to really tackle this issue. So we started Sama USA, and we've already graduated several classes and seen a lot of impact. Internationally, we're really rigorous about tracking impact. When I formed Samasource, I had this vision of creating a poverty alleviation organization that would actually track how many people it moved over the poverty line, by how much, at what cost to donors, and how long they stayed above the line. And this was informed by a lot of work I'd done in big NGOs and institutions, including the World Bank. And I remember particularly an undergraduate experience I had in working at the bank. I remember walking in and seeing etched in stone in the headquarters in DC, it says, "Our dream is a world free of poverty." So many of you probably aspire to work at institutions like the World Bank. I certainly did. This, to me, was the pinnacle of a career in global development. And I was shocked to learn back then, it's changed now, but I was shocked to learn back then that this institution had no targets for poverty eradication. We said our dream was a world free of poverty, and yet we couldn't commit to numbers, and we had the word bank in our title, right? It was crazy. And now, thanks to Jim Kim's leadership there, that started to change, and the bank is actually committed to extreme poverty reduction targets, which is really exciting. And so have we, and I think we're part of this new trend in social enterprise of transparency with respect to the impact outcomes. So far, we've lifted over 14,000 people above the poverty line. Our research shows that 92% of them stay there after leaving Samasource. They typically stay for about a year with us, and then they get higher paying work or move on to higher education. We've also been fortunate to get press. When I first started the organization in 2008, I was nearly laughed out of the room by every major foundation. I was told, poor people couldn't possibly do this work. It's way too complicated. It requires too many skills for them. What they really need is clean water, and maybe they can do microfinance. But this whole micro work thing, I don't know. It sounds too fancy. Too many IT skills are required. It was crazy to me. And slowly, as we started showing that this actually worked, as we started demonstrating that refugees in the largest refugee camp in the world, which was probably our boldest experiment, could do micro work at the same level of quality as people on a competing for-profit platform, we started to get traction. We started to get the ear of some of the biggest institutions in the world. And we also started to get press. We were on the cover of Fast Company magazine last year. We were in the New York Times and Forbes and the Wall Street Journal. And slowly but surely, we started gaining the backing of major funders. This year, the Rockefeller Foundation, which in 2008 wouldn't take a meeting with me because this idea was too crazy, this year they announced an $85 million investment into the Digital Jobs Africa initiative, which is designed to create 1 million jobs for young people using technology in sub-Saharan Africa in the next 5 years. incredible. We've seen a sea change. We've started to show people that this concept of micro work and a broader field, which is now called impact sourcing, the idea of connecting low-income people directly into the supply chains of the future, we've shown that this idea is not only viable, but also scalable and sustainable, that we can actually earn revenue. Samasource is now 50% funded through earned income, which makes us a lot less dependent on grants and donations than many nonprofits, and we hope to get that number up to 80%. So I'm going to tell you a few stories about Samasource, and then we'll talk a bit about Sama Hope, the new venture. So this is a photograph of a woman named Arfana Khatun, who I met in February this year. Arfana lives in a community called Metiabruz, which is outside of Calcutta in the northern part of India. And I visited Arfana to see this new center that had been set up a couple years ago, which was employing about 70 young women doing digital work for LinkedIn. They were also doing that fun project for Getty, tagging celebrities. And I was shocked that this could happen because this community of Metiabruz is known throughout Calcutta as being extremely conservative. Women in this community do not work outside the home. To walk outside for 3 minutes, I was given hijab and had to cover myself from head to toe. And Arfana, before doing digital work for Samasource, was sitting at home. She'd finished high school. She was very bright. And she was sitting at home doing piecemeal work for a local garment factory, making, I kid you not, 3 cents per shirt that she embroidered. It took her about 15 minutes, and her job was to stitch these little beads on the collars of these shirts. And she told me that even then she thought that this was a low wage, but she didn't know what to do because she couldn't work outside the home. There were no jobs available to women. The elder men in her family said, we don't think it's appropriate for you to go outside into the big city to find jobs. And there are no jobs that you can take locally here that we feel comfortable with. So we worked with a local partner to set up this all-women's facility. Arfana has now been working there for 2 years, and she's the primary breadwinner in her family. She has a cell phone. She has a bank account. And the same men in her family who told her, we don't feel comfortable with you working, are now encouraging all the young women in the family to get jobs because they see the economic benefits of doing so. It's incredible. And all of this happened not because of any political motives on our part. We didn't go in there trying to change this very conservative regime. We worked from within, right? We worked from within to change the economic paradigm, and it's had a tremendous result. We also work in northern Uganda, and I wanted to tell you briefly the story of Dennis. You can see his picture in the program. Dennis is a young man from a town called Awach. Unfortunately, he was abducted as a child soldier when he was about 11. How many of you have seen the Joseph Kony video that Invisible Children put out? All right, a fair number. So this region was devastated by civil war for 20 years. And young men like Dennis were taken and made to be child soldiers. And in the wake of that, the NGO community moved in and did rehabilitation programs. And these programs have been really successful. There are now all sorts of young men and women who are capable and waiting to do work. They finished high school, and yet there are no jobs. And this is, to me, almost a greater injustice. Now that these people have been through this terrible thing and been rehabilitated, there's no economic opportunity for them. So Dennis is part of a really interesting experiment. And that experiment is made possible by this. This is the internet. This is a fiber optic cable that stretches from Mombasa on the coast of Kenya all the way up into the hinterland of northern Uganda. It's pretty incredible to see. And this fiber optic cable follows the path of the 2-lane highway that goes up north in the country. And this fiber optic cable lands at a Wi-Fi tower that then spreads a focused Wi-Fi signal to 100 rural communities where inside shipping containers that are powered by solar panels, they're entirely off-grid, people like Dennis are able to do digital work for the first time. So you saw Dennis standing outside of his house earlier. He lives in a mud hut with a thatched roof that he built himself. His entire family and he were subsistence farmers for most of their lives. He's the only person in his family to have finished primary school. And he was desperate after finishing secondary school when he was 25 to go to college, but there are no school loans in Uganda. So he had no way of taking the next step. Thanks to Samasource, Dennis is now able to earn a living doing micro work, and he's now able to help send his kids to school and pursue a college education. So the potential for Samasource is extraordinary. I'm going to talk to you a little bit now about Sama Hope, which is a pretty different idea, but also uses technology to level the playing field in a different category, this time the category of global health. So a couple of years ago, I was visiting Sierra Leone. This is a picture I took from my car, just to give you a sense of what it looks like. Sierra Leone also went through a pretty brutal war. And I was shocked to learn when I was there visiting potential delivery centers for Samasource that the illiteracy rates are extremely high and electrification is really low. So it wasn't really a good place to start a Samasource center. And like any good entrepreneur, I kept my eyes open and thought, well, maybe there's some other opportunity. So I looked around and ended up visiting a rural clinic in the northern part of the country where I met this young woman, Tiange. Now, Tiange, see if the video plays here. Maybe not. Tiange, when I met her, was 16. This was a couple years ago. And I asked her what she was doing in this clinic. This was a clinic that was set up. There were all these women waiting in this ward for surgeries, and I didn't know much about what they were waiting for. She told me that she's waiting for a fistula surgery. Fistula is a birth injury that can make a woman incontinent if she has obstructed labor. In Sierra Leone, 1 in 14 women die in childbirth. It has one of the highest rates of maternal mortality in the world. And Tiange, at the age of 16, had suffered from incontinence due to a birth injury for 4 years. She'd been raped when she was 12 by a school teacher. And when she started talking to me, she started crying. And this is very unusual because women in this community are incredibly resilient. I've seen so many of them that have suffered horrendous indignities and don't shed a tear. So when one of them cries, I really paid attention. And Tiange told me that this fistula, this condition, had completely stripped her of her dignity. She couldn't leave her home because she would leak. And she had no choice but to stay at home for 4 years, to drop out of school. And then she heard about this clinic that was offering these great surgeries. So she showed up in this clinic, and they decided to treat her for free. This clinic was operated by a man named Dr. Maggi, who's a retired OBGYN from Denison, Texas, who decided, much to his wife's chagrin, that instead of spending his retirement money on a nice golf club and maybe buying them a nicer house, that he would start a nonprofit in Africa to do volunteer birth injury surgeries for women like Tiange. So he'd set up this clinic a few years back. And I asked Dr. Maggi, I said, this is incredible. What would it take to scale this up? He told me he did about 200 surgeries a year. He said, well, Leila, I'm a doctor. I'm not a fundraiser. I can do the best surgeries. I've delivered over 13,000 babies in my lifetime. But I really don't know how to fundraise. So I took that to heart. I set up a Facebook page for him. And as I was thinking more about this model, I realized that there was a tremendous need in global health to use technology to solve the fundraising problem, to solve that funding gap. And I did more research. I thought, well, is this really such a huge problem? And I learned that the numbers are really astounding. So the bottom third of humanity receives only 3% of all surgeries. We allow this to persist. We allow 1 woman every minute and a half to die in childbirth in 2013. It's astounding, right? Young children suffer from a range of injuries that are entirely preventable or fixable with low-cost medical treatments. And so I had this aha moment, much like the moment that I had at that outsourcing center. I'm friends with the co-founders of Kiva, which is a crowdfunding site for medical treatments. And I thought, what if somebody built like a Kiva or a Kickstarter to fund these surgeries? If we posted pictures of patients or maybe of doctors and described some of these conditions, every person in their right mind who saw the site would easily give $10 or $20. Who wouldn't? If you saw the story of Tiange, who wouldn't give right now $10 or $20 to help her? So I thought this needs to happen. I did some research. There was no crowdfunding site in global health. There was nothing that approximated this idea. And so I created Sama Hope with the help of 2 co-founders to create a platform for crowdfunding for neglected medical treatments. And it's pretty simple. We vet medical partners, just like Dr. Maggi's organization called the West Africa Fistula Foundation. We vet these medical partners. 100% of the donations on our website go to fund real treatments. And then we audit these partners to make sure they're doing a good job. And now, thanks to the internet, there's so much information that's publicly available on these organizations that the vetting process has become much easier. Currently, the site focuses on patients. So you can show up on the website, you can choose a patient who has a condition that you'd like to help treat, and you can fund that particular patient and then get a report back when the surgery is completed. But what we envision is a site where you actually fund a doctor. We're pivoting the model now. We believe that we can create a model where these doctors can tell their stories, and then we don't have to expose sensitive patient data. We've been fortunate to experience radical growth since we started. So we've seen a huge uptick in donations. We've attempted many different social media campaigns, and one of the things we tried that worked really well was called Honor Your Mom. And this was a really exciting attempt that we made to connect Mother's Day to this very important cause. We thought if moms around the world knew that this was an issue, they would turn down the candles and the flowers and the cute Hallmark cards, and they'd rather make a donation or have a donation made in their name. And so we created a campaign called Honor Your Mom, which raised about $40,000 in less than a week and got retweeted by celebrities, including Olivia Wilde. And we applied some of the same thinking that our peers in the social media space in Silicon Valley use, but to this problem. And the model is that you would upload a photo of you and your mom from back in the day, and make a 140-character designation or dedication to your mom, which we would tweet out. And then your mom actually got a physical card in the mail. So this was a wildly successful campaign that kind of went viral for us. And now we're looking at ways to extend that into the future. So that's SamaHope. I hope that these ideas have given you a sense of what's possible when you blend technology with social entrepreneurship, and when you blend technology with a vision for social justice. I think that there's so much more that we can do to solve these massive problems, to address the problem of poverty, which affects half of the world's population, which lives on less than $2.50 a day, to address the challenges in global health, to address challenges in our environment. We need smart people to move into this sector and to apply the same gusto and energy they have for entrepreneurship in the private sector to the social sector. So with that, I will end and invite you all to ask questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Leila, for those great remarks. I'm asking if Jill will come up, Jill Iscol, and she might have a word or two of comment she wants to make, but I also want to add, see if she'll start us out with a question, and then we'll open it up to the students.
Well, thank you so much, Leila. Wasn't she just kind of extraordinary? I learn, every time I listen to Leila, I learned something that I didn't know before, and I just wish I had that gift of being able to talk as fluidly as she does and be able to share what she just said when I say what I want to say about Leila to others when I talk about the book. But I thought, since I know you all have lots of questions, I'm just going to ask Leila something that I really don't know. Where do you want to be in 5 years?
Wow.
5, 10, you pick the...
Well, I really want the Sama group to grow. I think we can attract world-class entrepreneurial people to come and build out additional Sama ventures. And we now have this great base of support with the businesses that we already have. And I envision a family structure for this group that could spread the costs of fundraising and marketing and engineering across many different enterprises. One of the big barriers to nonprofit innovation is that to start a nonprofit, you have all these fixed costs. You have to recruit finance people. You have to recruit marketing people. If we could lower that cost by enabling this sort of platform for innovation, by enabling entrepreneurs to come to the Sama group and test their ideas, and if they're successful, to launch a Sama business of their own, that's my vision.
Sounds very exciting. I read recently that many people think that if you reduce infant mortality in the world, that you will then contribute to increased population, which is a problem. Would you like to comment on that?
Sure. I think that that's maybe a perception that's not really scientifically valid. what many people have found is that when you reduce infant mortality, women can more accurately predict the size of their families, and family planning is more possible. And so actually it would have the inverse effect. And interestingly, the best way to reduce population growth, they found, is to educate and employ women. Because when women have full-time jobs and are doing dignified work, they tend to have fewer children and have more agency in planning their families. So
Thank you for clarifying that.
it's almost a criminal view,
Yeah,
I think,
it's
right?
Yep. And I think just one more. When I wrote Hearts on Fire, I was writing about people who I admired because they were able to take their passions and turn them into idealism and turn them into activism. But recently I read something, very recently, that said, actually, skills trump passion. Could you react to that?
Sure. Well, I definitely think you need skills to be a social entrepreneur, but to me, passion is the most important thing. And it's interesting, but in Silicon Valley now, there's been this trend that favors founders, that favors keeping founders in CEO roles. It used to be that once companies grew to a certain size, the venture capitalists would want to oust the founder and put in a professional manager. But what they found over time is that the most successful entrepreneurs, most successful CEOs, are those that have that fire and that passion for the thing they created, for their baby. And so the venture capital community has realized that the most successful, or the recipe for success in Silicon Valley is to keep that founder in place, keep that fire and that passion in the organization, and keep the soul of the organization intact while hiring around them for the skills that they lack. And I certainly hope my board feels that way.
So Leila, just would you give some advice if you continue on that idea for the students here at Cornell? I mean, I know I look at you and say I could never, ever do what you're doing. But I'm passionate about a lot of things. So imagine, 40 years ago, I'm one of you. And what would you advise somebody like me who would have the passion and some knowledge and the will, but not so secure about the skill sets?
Becoming a social entrepreneur requires audacity, right? You really do have to overwhelm all of the naysayers. You have to manage your own psychology, in the words of one of my peers in Silicon Valley, who says that the biggest challenge as a CEO and as a founder is to conquer that lingering doubt inside you. And nobody has the skills, really. I mean, every CEO is deficient in some area in running their business, and even Harvard MBAs lack a number of skills that are required, right? And so your job as an entrepreneur is to go out and find people who have the skills that you lack. To me, the most important quality of an entrepreneur is fearlessness and audacity. And if you can sort of conquer your own doubts and hire around you to bring those skills into the organization, I think organizations that are founded by people who are deeply passionate are far more successful than those that are founded by people who are simply looking to make money.
John?
Thank you, Jill. That was great. Thanks so much.
But some students, I guess, it would be great to get some.
Yeah, let's get a few student questions, and if you want to talk to Jill afterwards and have her sign a book, she'll be up in the lobby after the talk. But let's have a few questions before we break. Any questions from the audience? Here's one up front here. Can you wait? Just wait for the mic. Okay, here we go.
So you were saying that passion is very important, but what kind of skills are you looking for students who you're hiring to be in your company? What kind of skills can we bring to your company?
Great question. My general advice to students is to develop some particular expertise in a category. So if you're interested in marketing, learn marketing skills. Those are going to be really relevant to a social venture. If you're interested in engineering, go take some, obviously you'll have computer science classes, but make sure that you're up to speed in the technology that's being used in Silicon Valley, right? And if you're coming to intern at one of those companies, be prepared to use those skills. We often find that people who want to be social entrepreneurs study just social entrepreneurship, or global development, but then they don't necessarily have any skills that are relevant to running an organization. And so while it's important to study the lessons of other social enterprises, it's also really important to develop some kind of functional skill set. I also encourage people, though sometimes I joke that we run like a rehabilitation program for management consultants and investment bankers. I do encourage students to go out and do something like that for a couple of years to get the training, to learn how to use Excel, to learn real business skills, because so many nonprofit organizations are crippled by lack of capacity. So that'd be my advice.
Hello. Can you talk a little bit about your plans to scale and how you choose the markets that you do enter? Because you'd mentioned Sierra Leone didn't have the infrastructure necessary for you to enter. So what's the thought process behind that?
Well, it used to be pretty willy-nilly. And I kind of got in trouble with our board because they'd be like, really, you really want to just go into Haiti randomly because they had an earthquake? Like, you know, we understand that you're passionate, but you can't just make decisions that way. So we stopped doing that, and we now have a much more robust process. And in fact, right now what we're focusing on is scaling within our current geographies because there's so much room to grow. Like in India, we calculated that there are 40 million people that we could eventually reach if we just focused on India. And so our scaling challenges are really not so much about conquering new geographies as they are about improving our own business model. And we're now at the stage where we're considering licensing our technology so that other social entrepreneurs can go out and create micro-work centers in different parts of the world without us having to be everywhere.
Over here. Are you worried about the fact that, considering how quickly technology will change, that very soon these simple tasks like this won't be relevant, and that that a large company could just do this without the people looking at the cars in the parking lots?
Absolutely. In fact, it's kind of funny that like we're teaching computers to do the jobs that our workers are doing now. So that thought has crossed my mind many times. And you know, I think one of the jobs of an entrepreneur and any entrepreneurial company is to stay ahead of that curve, right? To constantly innovate and adapt. If Apple, we were talking about Apple earlier today, if Apple, you know, hadn't forced itself to continually adapt, the company would have gone out of business and certainly not have gone into mobile phones, which were so different from the original product. So every organization, social enterprises included, have to constantly challenge themselves to think beyond the next year or two. So we do that in a few ways. We have longer-term strategic planning. And we also think about our mission more broadly than simply digital work in these particular categories. We think about our mission fundamentally as giving work rather than giving aid or handouts. And if you think about it that broadly, there's a whole world of things that people could do. According to Ray Kurzweil, the singularity, which is the moment at which computer intelligence will eclipse human intelligence, is coming in the year like 2042, I think. So we have a little ways to go.
Hi. First of all, it was a really amazing talk. And one of the things that I wanted to say was that I work primarily in the Philippines, and in Tagalog, Sama means together. And so that was, the name of your company is really evocative to me. And so what I wanted to ask was, I was really interested in one of the companies that you talked about working with was Walmart.com. And as you know, there have been some issues with Walmart and these issues related to the way that they treat their workers. And I was wondering what kinds of compromises and balances you've had to do in order to sort of evaluate the companies that you work with, or ways in which you may not, to what extent do you get involved with the actual practices of the specific companies who you source for?
I knew you guys weren't going to let me off the hook when I had a Walmart logo in my presentation. So, and I come from a super liberal family where, corporations were seen as kind of evil. And when I first talked about this business model, I remember my parents, kind of cringing. But look, I'm a pragmatist. And after spending a lot of time working in the pure NGO sector that was really, almost antagonistic towards big corporations, I realized that by not engaging the biggest institutions in the world for job creation, we are doing the poor a disservice. And the pragmatist in me says, we can talk all we want about human rights. I'm on the board of CARE, and CARE is a global humanitarian organization that does great work. And I'll just give you one example. We work in Benin, in one of the poorest countries in the world, in West Africa, and CARE runs a $6 million gender-based violence avoidance program. So we educate people to avoid abusing young women. The leading cause of gender-based violence in Benin is trafficking of young girls to be domestic workers across the border to Nigeria. Now, why do families send their young girls? Not because they don't know any better. No mom in her right mind wants to send her daughter to go and work as a housemaid in another country, right? That's absurd. It's not for lack of education that these women send their girls. It's because they can't afford not to. They earn $15 a month from that girl working over there, and that provides enough food for other family members to eat or for another kid to go to school. And as long as the girl comes back and she's safe, the mom thinks, well, that's a trade-off I have to make, right? So to me, the best way to address gender-based violence in Benin would be to attract more jobs for these women, right? Let's employ them. Let's set up a supply chain. What do? They farm shea butter. Let's set up a company that buys shea butter en masse from these women. And that would do far more for them than a radio program that teaches them not to send their girls, into a country that they don't want to send their girls to anyway. And so to me, the great challenge of our sector is to figure out how to work with these corporations which have massive scale and so much capital, right? The brilliance of this model is that we're using Walmart's money to fund poverty alleviation in East Africa, money that would never have gone into those communities had we not started partnering with them. Now, the challenge for us is to, at the same time, negotiate with these companies to provide living wages for all people, right? And so we've definitely brought it up in meetings. This living wage issue in DC was one of the areas. But I think that working with these companies and working from within is so much more effective than standing outside with a picket sign. And I think I hope that model gets embraced by more young people who see a duty that they have to go in and make this kind of transformation happen from within.
Over here. So in getting the company to where it is now, what would you say was the biggest mistake you made, and how did you learn from it?
Biggest mistake? I think the biggest mistake we made was not being bold enough at the beginning. At the beginning, when people kept saying, no, this was a silly idea, there was a part of me that started to internalize it and make our projections, we had smaller projections. We raised less money than we could have in the early days. I think we were less aggressive than we could have been. And it's funny, but so many entrepreneurs I know tell me the same thing. They say, the only mistake I made was maybe not pushing hard enough on my idea early on and accepting some of that doubt. So I'd say that's one thing. In parallel with that, I will say that it's really important to have metrics in place that help you understand whether your early experiments are successful. So we give every employee at Samasource a copy of the Lean Startup book, which some of you might have heard of, which advocates for this iterative approach of throwing stuff at the wall, and if you're going to fail fast and learn from it so that you can move towards success. And many of the early experiments we did didn't end up working. We tried working in a refugee camp. It turned out that was really dangerous, and we couldn't sustain that because Al-Shabaab was kidnapping people in that camp. So we had to move on, right? But we proved that it might work under certain circumstances. And that model, I think, is so important for social entrepreneurs to embrace.
Maybe one more question, and then we'll have to wrap it up.
Do you have any new organizations that you plan on bringing to light in the near future, or are you working on further developing the ones you've already established?
That's a good question. Well, I definitely have my hands full, and my model is really to find great leadership. So we have managing directors in place in each of these enterprises that takes over a lot of the day-to-day operations once they get to a certain size. There's one other venture that I'm working on that was inspired by that trip to Benin, where I noticed that these poor rural women could produce shea butter, which happens to be an amazing ingredient for skincare. So I'm working on a beauty business that would be another Sama enterprise that would probably be a for-profit enterprise and contribute revenues to the nonprofits in that category. So if any of you are interested in any of these businesses, we're recruiting actively, and on my website you can actually apply to join the Sama group, and I hope that I see some applications from all of you.
Well, thank you so much, Leila.
Thank you.